this computer. Cool. All right, hey, what's up, friends? This is Mr. Ippolito. I got Mr. Han with me, and in case you missed the lesson today, it was a great lesson. Oh my gosh, we learned so much about the North. Just want to let you know, we're now in a new unit called Antebellum America. You saw that on Google Classroom. Antebellum means before the war. So we're studying the time period before the American Civil War, which we're going to get to in just a couple weeks. So this week we're learning about the North. Next week we're going to learn about the South. And we're trying to figure out the big, like the essential question, the big picture is, how did the North and the South become so different economically, culturally, socially, politically, that they were literally willing to kill each other in the American Civil War? So we're starting today by learning about the North. And so just a quick thing on the geography, first of all. In the North, geography, and I should stop. I should stop and say, there are going to be 4 discussion questions. So at any point in time, you can pause this recording, but there are going to be 4 discussion questions. Those questions you're going to be asked in the Ed Puzzle, so you need to be prepared to answer those questions in the Ed Puzzle. So let's start off now by talking about geography. In the North, they had rocky soil, which means it was tougher to grow crops in the North. You couldn't have these big sprawling farms, big sprawling plantations like you could in the South. So that meant small family farms, right? These are just enough. Those families can grow just enough crops just to support generally themselves, their families, maybe sell a little to the neighbors, but for the most part, small family farms as opposed to big plantations like they had in the South. Natural harbors, these are deep water harbors where big ships can get in. Harbors would be in places like Boston, Philadelphia, New York City, right? So these are New York, New Jersey area. These are natural harbors where big ships can get in and out of. This is going to be good, of course, for shipping, right? For shipping and trade. That's why the North was more of a leader in shipping and trade than the South was, because they had more of these natural harbors. And finally, fast-flowing rivers. And by the way, anytime you see one of these links here, you can click on this link and it'll take you to a video or some more information about that. So fast-flowing rivers were really good because they were able to move these mills, like the water wheels that were on these mills. And like Mr. Han was talking about earlier today, sawmills, for example. That was an example of a factory where basically it would, the blades of the saw, the circular saw, would move because of the power of the water that was flowing through the river. So they were using, without even realizing it yet, they were using like hydropower, right? Which will later become hydroelectric power, but at the time just hydropower, water power to move these, to move this machinery in these factories and these mills. And that's why most factories and mills in the North in the 1800s were located right on rivers. Mr. Han, did I miss anything on this?
No, sir.
All right. Population, northern cities were growing, and part of the big reason why they were growing was because of immigrants. In 1848, there were 2 things that happened. In Germany, there were these democratic revolutions where they were trying to overflow, unsuccessful democratic revolutions, right, Mr. Han?
Yes, sir.
Where they were trying to overthrow the royalty in Germany. That didn't quite work. A lot of Germans left in fear of their lives. A lot of them left to come to the United States. They moved out to farms. They had experience farming, so they moved out to farmland in Ohio and Pennsylvania, places like that. In Ireland, there was a potato famine, and so 1/3 of the population of Ireland died in the late 1840s and early 1850s because they starved to death. 1/3 of them stayed in Ireland, and then another 1/3 of them moved to the United States. And so that's when we had a massive influx of Irish immigration into the United States because of the potato famine in the 1840s. This is a stop and think. So push-pull factors, we've already learned about this term. So what were some of those push-pull factors? This is the first question that you're going to answer in the Ed Puzzle. If you want to stop, talk to friends, talk to family members, you are welcome to use them as resources for these questions. All right, moving on. Population in the North, they were immigrants looking for work. They settled in northern cities because unskilled jobs were available. There's a difference between skilled and unskilled. If you know how to farm, if you know how to take care of animals, if you have that experience, like the German immigrants did, then they have more of those skilled laborers, right? But a lot of these immigrants, especially immigrants who were coming from Ireland, coming from the cities of Ireland, they knew how to work in a factory, but those are unskilled jobs. So a lot of them settled in these northern cities, Boston, Philadelphia, New York City, because those unskilled jobs were available. They had trouble improving working conditions because they were so easily replaced. If there is a new ship of immigrants coming into the North every single week, then if you complained about your job, if you didn't like your working conditions, heck, if you just lost your hand in a in a machine, then they could fire you. Today, there are so many more protections in the workplace. There's something called OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which sets workplace rules to make sure that everybody is safe. Back then, there was no such thing as OSHA. There was no such thing as workplace safety. There was no such thing as workers' compensation. If you get injured on the job, something happens to you. Back then, there was nothing to help you with that. A lot of Americans hated the Irish because they drove wages down lower. And so this was, there was a lot of anti-Irish sentiment in the North during this time period. So the economy, we've already talked about factories. There's a video you can watch right there if you want to click on that for more information, with a wide variety of industries, including textiles. There were artisans and shipping. Textile industry is the production of, it's taking cotton or wool and turning it into fabric, right? And then taking that fabric and turning it into clothing, or taking cotton you can turn into canvas, which is a type of weave of cotton, and then you can take that canvas and turn it into ship sails, because shipping was a big thing back then, right? And still, if you wanted to go across the ocean, you were still on sailing ships, clipper ships, right? So the textile industry, that was the production of cloth, fabric, using the raw materials like cotton and wool. Artisans, their job was a little bit tougher. Artisans are people who make things with their hands. Make clothing by hands, or make shoes by hands, or other like manufactured goods. Their job is becoming tougher and tougher because of the rise of factories. And then finally, of course, shipping. So shipping and trade was a big part of the northern economy as well, especially because they have those deep water harbors. There were downfalls to the factory system. There were very few windows or heating systems. So if you click on this link here, there's actually a story of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire that I included in there. It was actually in the early 1900s, but it still, it spoke to the poor working conditions. That story is horrible, by the way. There were, it was all women who worked in that factory, and hundreds of them died because there was a fire, and they blocked or locked fire escapes. There were no such thing as fire extinguishers or like fire safety, no fire sprinklers or anything at that time. It was a horrible tragedy, but it speaks to the poor working conditions of the 1800s and the early 1900s. Dangerous machinery, Mr. Hahn talked about, like, it was real easy to get your hand mangled in a machine. And so, there's tough luck, because there's nothing you can do. There's also no such thing at this time as unions. There's no labor organizations to protect workers' rights or protect their pay. It was just, if you got injured on the job, well, there's somebody else who's going to come in and replace you. Low pay and long hours. Okay, Mr. Hahn, this we actually had a discussion on, and I want to stop for a moment and talk about this. Do you know what a hypocrite is? And talking about this question here. So I do want to slow down a little bit, because this, I think, is a tougher question. Mr. Hahn, what is a hypocrite?
A hypocrite is a person. I'm terrible at defining what a hypocrite is. A hypocrite is a person that judges somebody else for their behavior, but then he or she themselves, they do the same thing. So yeah. I don't know if that explains it pretty well.
It's kind of a do as I say, not as I do kind of situation.
Right.
You tell people to do something, but then you're not even doing it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a discussion in class today. Why would a Southern plantation owner call a Northern abolitionist industrialist, like someone who owns a factory, why would they call them a hypocrite? And a lot of the answers we got, really, really good answers. Things like, well, hey, you're criticizing slavery. You're saying slavery is wrong, but you're treating your factory workers practically like slaves. And actually, in some cases, I would even argue, Mr. Hahn, even though the practice of slavery was absolutely horrible, absolutely, it was awful, awful, awful. But I would argue that in some cases, Northern factory owners might have even treated their factory workers worse, because the Southern plantation owners, they saw their slaves as an investment. And so they wanted to care for their health and their safety and their well-being. And to replace a slave would be expensive. Slaves were very costly. So I think in some cases, the Northern factory owners might have been even more cruel in some ways, because they thought that workers were expendable.
That's true, yeah.
So, but I mean, both practices were horrible, and I'm not defending either one. But and I think the other conversation we had was that the slaves, the plantations in the South, were creating the raw materials, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so these plantation owners were getting rich because they don't have to pay for labor. But then they would take that cotton and send it north, where it would be processed in a textile mill or a factory in the north. And so the factory owners in the north are also getting wealthy off of this cheap cotton. So really, whether you're a factory owner in the north or a plantation owner in the south, both of these both of these owners are taking advantage of workers and are taking advantage of really enjoying the benefits of having low labor costs associated with the growing of the raw materials, in which case, in this case, it's cotton. Okay, moving on to technology. New inventions transform northern factories. Technologies and inventions like the telegraph. If you remember the painting American Progress, and the angel, the goddess figure that's flying through the air in the middle, she's laying down telegraph lines. Telegraphs, you remember, are the original text message, right? So it was a series of electrical impulses that were used to transmit messages all across the country, eventually all across the country once it went from East Coast to West Coast. But initially, they went from big city to big city: Philadelphia, Boston, New York, Baltimore. They're connecting all of these big cities, and that was the telegraph. The sewing machine, which made the production of clothing so much faster. Before then, you had to make clothing by hand, and with the sewing machine, it makes it so much faster. And then finally, the steam engine. So the steam engine was first introduced in the steamboat in 1807 by
Robert Fulton.
Robert Fulton, yes, his steamboat, the Clermont. And so the steam engine was initially being used not for like ships going across the Atlantic Ocean, but just ships going up and down rivers, right? And the steam engine, of course, would later be used for railroads as well. So, but the steam engine was really was so instrumental in transforming the transportation industry, because it made the movement of goods much faster, either by boat or later by railroad. And then talking really quickly about transportation, these three main forms of transportation: canals. This picture right here shows a picture of the Erie Canal. Let's see if I can get my pointer here. So the Erie Canal would connect Lake Erie and to a certain extent also Lake Ontario all the way to the Hudson River. And then the Hudson River would ultimately go all the way out to the Atlantic Ocean. So the Erie Canal and other canals were super important for connecting these areas, Chicago, Detroit, other areas here in Buffalo, more inland to the Atlantic Ocean. So these canals were really important. Railroads, as we already talked about. By the way, great videos here on canals, railroads. That canal video also talks about turnpikes as well. The railroads vastly improved transportation of goods, and later transportation of people. We're going to show you a video in just a moment. And then finally, turnpikes. So a turnpike is actually a medieval term, which refers to, like, a pike is a wooden post, and you would, back in the old days, you would like lay up, you would build a road, smooth the road, so that wagons could transport, from one place to another, and then you would put a post across the road, which you would turn to get it out of the way when someone would pay you to travel on your road. So a turnpike is basically a toll road. Today, you can still, if you go to visit New Jersey or Pennsylvania, they still call their toll roads turnpikes: the Pennsylvania Turnpike, the New Jersey Turnpike. Here in California, we don't call them turnpikes, but we do have in Orange County, and then also up in Northern California, we have toll roads. So if you want to drive across the Golden Gate Bridge or the Bay Bridge, you have to pay a toll. So the idea of toll bridges and toll roads, that has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. Here in the United States in the 1800s, when they wanted to make transportation easier for wagons, they would build these turnpikes, which would be toll roads. All right, I loved this video. And so we're going to show you this video here, basically showing the growth of railroad transportation starting in 1830 is kind of when the railroads were first introduced. So you can see them kind of popping up here in New England, Pennsylvania, Maryland. You can see kind of the time as it's moving over time. I'm going to pause really quickly. Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, big. These, by 1847, railroads are going all the way across New York State to Lake Erie and Lake Ontario right there, all throughout New England. There's the Boston area going up into Maine and New Hampshire, down into Rhode Island and Connecticut. I also want you to notice, as the video continues, how many more railroads there are in the north than there are in the south. Boom, there's a great example right there. Also interesting to note, no railroads out here in the west just yet. We're going to click play. 1857, even more railroads. And then by 1867, you'll notice in Gold Country, Sacramento, San Francisco, a little bit of railroad action here. A far more robust railroad network in the northern states. up here. Then down in the south, Kentucky, virtually, I mean, like only really one kind of railroad line running through Kentucky. A few here, Virginia, North and South Carolina, Georgia, hardly anything down in lower Florida right here. There's New Orleans. Let me close this. There's New Orleans right there. So that's kind of a connector right there. So this is going to be really, really important during the Civil War, because the transportation of goods, food, weapons, materials, that's going to be so much more a northern advantage because they have so many more railroads than the South does. And then finally, the Transcontinental Railroad, which we haven't quite gotten to yet, that's after the Civil War. This is the Transcontinental Railroad right here that finally connected San Francisco to the rest of the East Coast. All right, so hitting escape and full screen on that, maybe. And can I go back to full screen? Maybe not. All right. Yeah. So here's another stop and think. We're not going to talk about this too much, but thinking of technology and transportation, what do you think were the two most valuable inventions of this time period and why? I want you to think about it, talk about it. You're going to put that answer in your Edpuzzle, and then we're going to move on. Finally, this is our last part of the presentation on culture. So the culture of the North. First of all, public education. I am a huge champion of public education and a huge advocate because I teach in a public school. Before the invention of public education, the only people who got an education were the wealthy, children of the wealthy. Who could afford, because before public education, there was only private school or private tutors. That's the only way you would get an education. But the people of the North, they felt that public education was going to be the great equalizer. It was going to promote democracy because every child, whether you're rich or poor, every child is going to have access to a free public education. So they were doing that in the North, not really so much in the South, but definitely in the North. Reform movements like abolition, that was the movement to end slavery. Temperance movement, the movement to end the consumption of alcohol. I'm going to talk about that more in just a moment. Women's rights, we'll talk about that more on Wednesday. Prison reform and the treatment of the mentally ill. All of these links here, link to videos. If you want to learn more, please, we just don't have time, during our class, but these are all great YouTube videos where you can learn more about each of these movements. I do want to point out Carrie Nation right here. It was actually from the later 1800s, but she was quite a pistol. You can see the picture of her with an axe in her hand. Quite literally, she would go into bars and saloons and watch out, because she would go behind the bar and she would just smash those alcohol bottles. She would just go in and tear stuff up. The idea being, the reason why there were people who were so passionate like Carrie Nation about temperance is because they thought that they thought that alcohol was one of the great evils of society. It caused husbands to beat their wives. It caused husbands to be neglectful of their children and their families. It caused husbands to miss work. So you can, if you're thinking about this, you're thinking of like, well, these husbands are the ones who are abusing alcohol more. It was women that were really leading the charge on the temperance movement. If we just got rid of the consumption of alcohol, our country would be so much better. So all of these reform movements, and please, if you have the time and you're interested, this video right here, you click on treatment of the mentally ill. There was a woman named Dorothea Dix in the mid 1800s. She was so influential in changing the way our country felt about and treated the mentally ill. Those are reforms that you're going to see throughout the 1800s and even into the 1900s. As we know, the more we know, the better we're able to treat people with mental illness. But quite literally before this, they were treated like criminals, and people with mental illness were treated so poorly. So this is the story of Dorothea Dix, who fought for better treatment for the people with mental illness. Mm-hmm. And then finally, your final stop and think question, I'll let you read this, is basically, besides the abolitionist movement, which of course freed the slaves, so that's pretty big, which other reform movement in the 1800s do you think has had the greatest impact on our society and culture? And so just, make a quick thought on that. And that's going to be your final question that you're going to answer in the Edpuzzle for these 4 stop and think questions. Oh, Mr. Hahn, wow, that was a lot in a short amount of time. Trying to go through that really quickly. So, Mr. Hahn, what else should we say to students who maybe missed class but who are watching this recording right now?
So the Edpuzzle assignment, that's going to be through Google Classroom. Let's see. Do you have it up, sir?
Yeah, let me go ahead and I'll pull this up so that we can see this.
The agenda.
In the agenda here.
Hmm. Yeah. So like it says in the agenda, what was it? The four discussion questions in the slideshow that we just went over. Those are the first four questions in the Ed puzzle. There are 6 additional questions in the Ed puzzle that are spread throughout the video as well. So 10 questions in total that need to be answered. Please take your time and watch the video and and read each question and the choices that are available. Take your time and watch the video carefully, look over the questions carefully, on all the choices carefully, and double check your answers and everything before you submit, because there is no retake opportunity for this Ed puzzle. And just don't rush it. Just take your time with it. Everything will work out.
I thought that it was appropriate since you can watch it and rewatch it and rewatch it and rewatch it over and over and over again. It's just retakes are so incredibly time consuming that for this one I can't do, especially with the grading period ending this Friday. I can't do one more retake. So this one you just got to take the time and do it right the first time. Please don't rush it. Watch the video as many times as you need to, and then all right. So Mr. Hahn, I think that's it. So. So you know what you need to do. It's really the only thing you are turning in is that Ed puzzle, because it includes the questions from our discussion today, those 4 discussion questions, and then the questions on the video. And
that's due Friday.
Yep, very good. All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Hahn, and
thank you, sir.
Thank you to all of our Team Amazon students. And have a wonderful day. This Ed puzzle assignment, is due on Friday, so take the time to do it right. And we'll see you on Wednesday for Women's Rights Wednesday. Have a great day. Bye-bye.